Our discussion is in the first half of chapter 3 of the book of Mark. Okay, so I'm going to change the share now. This is where things started dying. Okay, well, let's begin the reading of Mark chapter 3. And we are talking about great things. The early people who saw Jesus, or the people who saw Jesus in the early part of his ministry, were seeing great things. Now, they're not the same things that we, if you ask me as a believer, what great things has Jesus done? I would start with salvation and his love for me. He's provided me with sanctification. I'm using theological words there.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I don't personally have an example of healing in my life where I could say Jesus healed me of some disease. I don't have that.
Oh, I prayed like crazy.
Well, okay, that's fine. That's fine. Other people do. That's good. But these people that we're talking about here in Mark chapter 3 are seeing great things, mostly in the healing category. And part of the reason Jesus is wrestling with this is they aren't seeing the great thing that he's offering them in terms of repentance and the coming of the kingdom. They're kind of missing that point, and they want to see miracles. So that's where we begin in Mark chapter 3, miracles. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard all he was doing, now I'm emphasizing that what he was doing was healings. Many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, I think that's Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Now, the question over in my right-hand column asks, how large was the area the crowds came from? This is a little geography lesson. The Sea of Galilee is in the northern part of what we think of as the state of Israel, right? Northern part. Jerusalem.
Incidentally, it happens to be the second lowest place on earth.
Oh,
And is the Dead Sea the lowest? So it's the second.
Like Capernaum would have been down there in the second lowest place on earth.
Well,
All those towns surrounding.
what's that desert out in our west? It's
Death Valley?
Death Valley.
Yeah.
Isn't that in the next category? I mean, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's number 3, but it's one of the lowest places on earth.
Yeah.
I've traveled through that.
Oh.
My family did, and it happened to coincide. I was probably 5 or 6 years old, had a cold sore on my lip, and I could not stand in the direct sun in Death Valley. The sun was so intense, I had to shave this thing on my mouth. We have a picture of my family standing in front of the sign that says, "Welcome to hell." Now, it was actually Hell, California. California was written in small type, but it said, "Welcome to hell, California." So it was hot. Okay. Anyway, the people. Okay, so now Tim, let's do a little bit more with geography. Sea of Galilee is in the upper part of Israel. Jerusalem is in the southern part of Israel. So Jerusalem, Idumea refers to the southern region of Israel. The region across the Jordan takes you east. So we've got the northern part, that's Galilee. We've got the southern part with Jerusalem. We've got the eastern part beyond the Jordan. It doesn't say exactly where those are, but they were. And then we've got Tyre and Sidon.
Which is the west.
Yes, and that's actually northwest.
Northwest.
Yeah, Tyre looks like it's about 100 miles from Jerusalem.
North, right? Northwest.
Yeah. Northeast. Yeah, north.
Towards the Mediterranean.
Right, towards the water.
It's right along the Mediterranean Sea.
Yes. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so maybe it's not so much west as north. But there's something interesting about Tyre and Sidon. Do you know the history of, well, first of all, what kind of a town is Tyre and Sidon?
Gentile.
What is it?
Gentile.
Gentiles.
Oh,
But now there's an interesting thing about that. It is true, they were Gentiles, but they weren't supposed to be. The tribe of Asher. The tribe of Asher, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, was given that region. I had forgotten this story until I studied for this. You know what they told God? No, those people are too strong. So they refused to take the territory. And frankly, I don't know the rest of the story. I don't know where they ended up living. They probably lived in the other areas of Israel, but they didn't conquer Tyre and Sidon. So I think that's interesting. Jesus is conquering Tyre and Sidon, not with military, but with his.
almost
In
cultural.
fact, complimenting them, that's where the widow
Yes.
came from.
Yes.
Who
So I think
put
it's-
the crumbs that-
I think it's very telling that one of the groups, one of the places where people are coming from are those Gentiles that the Jews refused to conquer.
They're becoming Christians.
Well, actually, at the moment, we don't know that.
Okay,
They are simply coming to see Jesus do healings.
okay.
We don't know. Go ahead, Bill.
Sidon is 30 miles north of Tyre, outside of the region of Asher.
Okay, that's fine. I didn't remember that.
That's way up there. Yeah.
I think I'm right about the Jews never actually conquered the area of Asher.
Wow.
So the overall point is that there was a radius of, say, 7,500 miles from Capernaum, where Jesus was based, of coverage. The people were willing to travel that far.
Yeah, and picture it, back in those days, a 20-mile trip is a long day's walk.
Right.
So would you say 75 to 100? So you're talking 4 or 5 days to see this guy. That's and 4 or 5 days back, I think. So that's a pretty substantial trip. And one more thing, notice it does include Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is where the big shots live. So Jesus' ministry is covering a wide area, but it's also covering the key area of Jerusalem. That's important because he's attracting attention in the temple, where power is wielded.
He did go, he spent virtually all his time around Galilee in the north. But he did honor the feast days.
Sure.
So he would go
He would
The
go
temple
himself
in
to
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. Right. Okay,
to several times a year.
let's continue. Verse 9. Because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him, to keep the people from crowding him. Now, we don't know if this is an example of, and we've all seen the picture, where Jesus is sitting in the back of the boat and he's teaching to the crowd up on the shore. That may be what's going on here. As the crowd got bigger, he wanted to take advantage of the natural amphitheater approach. Yeah, that may be it. Or he may have actually been planning an escape. As the crowd got big enough, he wanted to have his way across arranged.
Yeah.
It doesn't say what he did with the boat.
Incidentally, do you know what kind of boat it was? The Christ craft.
Chris Pratt. Chris Pratt.
Yeah. We talk
Did you have
about,
one of those on the Great Lakes? I mean, the Finger Lakes?
we joke about merit, Tim, but maybe we should also talk about demerit. Okay.
Those were the wooden boats, right?
Yeah, I have a friend, or had a long time ago, who had a nice wooden Chris Craft on Deep Creek Lake in Maryland. It was
That
beautiful.
would have been gorgeous.
It was beautiful. It wasn't very hospitable. Like modern boats where you have lots of room to put 8 or 10 people.
Yeah.
I think you could get 4 people in 2 seats. That was it. All the rest of it was surface. Yeah.
It was just a tour.
Yeah, like a car. Okay, anyway. He's got this boat ready. And now, verse 10, for he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. So it is about the healing. He's attracting crowds. But then we get this, verse 11. Whenever the evil spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell who he was. Now, we talked about this before. I think it's about 2 weeks ago. The evil spirits recognize Jesus. They are in a spiritual plane. And so they can see better than human beings can see who this guy is. So in their minds, they have no doubt. And I've expressed this before. I find it amazing that a being could have no doubt who Jesus was and still choose to worship the devil. That's what's happening here. They see Jesus, they know exactly who he is, and they are still fighting him. I find that amazing.
On my notes here, it says, Jesus always rebuked demons for their testimonies about him. He wanted his teaching and actions, not the impure words of demons, to proclaim who he was.
Yeah, that's right. And we're getting there, Bill. Thank you. He doesn't want the testimony of demons to establish his kingdom or his kingship. He wants believers to say, "You are the Son of God." We know the story about Peter. Later, Peter is going to say, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." That comes from God, not from demons.
Still, the fact remains that all of the demons knew more about Jesus than most of the people.
Yes, I just find that curious. Now, Tim asked a question, though. Why do the demons fall down? Look in verse 11. Whenever the evil spirits saw him, they fell down before him. It'd be one thing to stick your tongue out and continue to curse. You know, you're cursing this man, Jesus. But notice that they fall down. I think it's an indication of this spiritual warfare that's going on. We
Acknowledging Jesus' authority.
Yes, and again, they still resist and they worship the devil. They are forced to their knees when Jesus faces them. They can't help it.
Kind of like a big typhoon.
Okay, you can't stand in the face of this thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it's a spiritual battle, but they still resist.
And they know the program, at least part of the program. They know that Jesus is going to destroy them at some point in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the demon said, have you come to destroy us before the time, before the appointed
They've read the
hour?"
book of Revelation.
You know, the angels were beings also, like demons, but they chose to worship Jesus.
Yes, yes. There's a movie that I've told you guys about before. It's called Encounter. The premise is that Jesus is running a roadside diner.
Yeah.
And one evening, a group of people, because of a bad storm, are waylaid in the diner. And there's interaction between the people and Jesus, both. And there's this one scene near the end where one of the guys has pretty much declared that he's willing to go with Satan rather than stay with Jesus. He just refuses to be a believer. And Satan walks into the scene. He doesn't look like Satan. He looks like a police officer, but that's what he is. And actually, just to make it quick, his name is Officer DeVille.
Oh, devil.
Yeah. Okay. So Officer DeVille walks into the scene, and he is crowing about the fact that one of the people who Jesus was trying to save that night was going to leave with him. He was making fun. I don't remember how else to put it, but Jesus just goes like this. He doesn't even say shut up. He just goes like that, and the devil is pushed back against the door, and just drops it in. But still, he opens the door, and the guy leaves with him. So Jesus doesn't force the man to stay in his presence.
Yeah.
He lets the guy who's about to die leave. But the point was, the devil was forced just by Jesus raising one finger to be silent and to leave his presence. I thought that was appropriate. I think that's the same director that does the gospel, but I'm not sure. I like that movie. Anyway, so the devils are falling to their knees because Jesus is the one with authority. That's the real answer to your question. Jesus has the authority. Okay, we need to move because we're not going to finish the next part. In the next section of the third chapter, Jesus calls his disciples. Now, we've already seen a little bit of that. We've seen the calling of Peter and his brother, and we've seen the calling of James and John. But now we get this picture. Jesus goes up to the mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, designating them apostles, that they might, this is important, notice what they are to do. You've just been called as an apostle. What's your job? Your job is they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. So they've got really two jobs. Jesus wants some close friends for the next, 2.5, 3 years. And he wants to prepare them to be preachers. To preach and to have authority to drive out demons is what the scripture says. Now, there are specific episodes where this happens. Jesus sends them out, and then they come back and report. You've seen that in other gospels. Okay, but their general role is, I guess, to be with him is kind of like to be his student. He's called them to be his students, and from time to time, he's going to ask them to do some work, to preach and to drive out demons. Now, the names of the people we're all familiar with, and Tim points out who was first and last. In any time you list the apostles, Simon Peter comes first. He's always listed as the first apostle. And who's always last?
Betrayer.
Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. But in between, we've got other folks. Some are more familiar than others. As I said, we already know about James and John. So notice the way this is laid out. Simon Peter, James, and John are the first three names we see. And they are the ones who are going to make up kind of the executive committee. They're the ones that go up, for example, to the Mount of Transfiguration. So they're the closer inner circle, even though that's not formally identified. But there are other people: Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot. Depending on which gospel you read, you might get some variations here. For example, the name Bartholomew that appears somewhere in the middle of that list, that's a last name. Technically, Bar means son of, son of Tholomew. So some people think that that's Nathaniel. You'll get the name Nathaniel in some lists.
Yeah.
So his name, I guess, was Nathaniel Bartholomew, but they didn't think in those terms. But that's, anyway. Tim, you said you had some input on these. What input would you like to give for those handful?
We've got a few minutes, please.
Yeah, we have 10 minutes.
Well, it was surprising to me how little we know about some of these.
Right.
About half of them.
I was going to say 6 is a good number. 6.
Yeah, about half of them are only mentioned in these lists, these
Yes.
4 lists.
So half of them we don't really know what happened. There's church tradition about them, but that's about all it is, church tradition.
What is the tradition?
Well, it varies. Some went to India, some went down to
I see.
Ethiopia. So the word spread across the Mediterranean. Who spread it? And we know from the book of Acts, Paul, but also we know some of these others.
Yeah.
But go ahead, Tim. What do you know?
Well, starting with Peter, just a quick review of where he shows up in the Bible, where he walks on the water.
That's what I was saying.
He's disowning Jesus to avoid persecution.
Yeah.
He addressed the crowd at Pentecost. This was a very big deal. This was the first sermon to the new church. And Peter had the honor of doing that. He envisioned a church that included Jews and Gentiles together. Remember the story of Cornelius and Peter?
Yeah.
Finally got.
It took him a while to get around to that. Paul was first on that, but Peter did come around.
So Peter got to witness some of the miracles, and he's mentioned as being present at the time Jesus raised the girl from the dead, Lazarus' daughter, Jairus' daughter, the transfiguration, Jesus' moment of deep prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. Peter was front and center there. And we know probably more about Peter than any of the other apostles. James in the Bible, Mark tells us that Jesus nicknamed James and John sons of thunder, or Boanerges in Greek. Boanerges. We don't really know what the reference is to. Why thunder? It could be that they were boisterous and loud.
I was going to say, I would try to come up with personality traits, because that's what it sounds to me like. Not that they had loud voices.
Or it could be their ambition.
Yeah, that's
they
true.
They asked Jesus, and their mother asked.
Yeah, actually, their mother asked Jesus to promote them.
Right. Make sure they got a better deal. James, in the Bible, James, the son of Zebedee, is most known for asking Jesus if he and John should call down fire from heaven.
That could be thunder again.
That could be the tendency toward violence.
To call down violence.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that. That's true.
Well, which is not entirely out of the blue. Remember, Sodom had fire called and destruction.
Yeah, it's
called
God's
down
judgment.
on it. It's God's judgment.
Calling down God's judgment.
That's right, and they had rejected Christ in that case, so why not? Of course, Jesus said,
Not today.
they asked Jesus if he and John can sit on either side of Jesus' throne in heaven. And unwittingly promising to follow Jesus into Mark, which they didn't immediately anyway. But they were, James, there are three Jameses, so things get confusing.
Yes.
This James was by church tradition. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. This actually was recorded in Acts 12. He was martyred by Herod.
Yes.
So he was one of the few deaths.
This James Zebedee
Yes,
is killed in the book of Acts. Yes. There's a James, notice there's a James on this same list, down son of Alphaeus.
yeah, I'm getting to that.
Okay,
John in the Bible.
okay, go ahead.
So this completes the executive triumph. Like his brother James, John was given the nickname son of thunder. He was known for asking Jesus if he and James should call down fire, asking Jesus if he and James can sit on either side of the throne. I guess they did it together. Taking care of Jesus' mother at the crucifixion. Jesus specifically asked John to take care of him.
Yeah, Tim, I think on this point we should expand. People are probably of different minds, but I personally believe that the John we're talking about here is the John who wrote the letters. So John 1, okay, John 2, in the New Testament, is the author of the Gospel of John, and is John of Patmos, who wrote the book of Revelation.
So he wrote more books than any other.
Yeah, you don't have to believe that. I know there are people who don't make all those same John the same person, but I find it self reinforcing.
I do too. Greg Carey was one who disputed the authorship of the gospel, and there is sufficient scholarly agreement on this.
I think so.
That we can trust in.
But my reaction to the gospel or to the book of Revelation is I'm thinking of the same guy who we're talking about here
Yes.
as identified in the list of disciples. So
Yes.
he was a firsthand witness, and he had a long ministry, because the book of Revelation is written, and the book of John is written late. So he had a long ministry that began right here.
Yeah. He never identified himself in the gospel, except he did refer to the beloved one.
The one who he
One
loved, or
Jesus
something like
loved.
that. Okay, go ahead. Other
He
points?
was referred to being a pillar in the church by Paul in Galatians. And as you said, the 5 books of the Bible. Andrew was the son of Simon Peter's brother, and he was the one who brought Peter to Jesus.
Right. We have
You
seen this.
remember here in the church years ago under Wallace Bishop, we had an order of St. Andrew. Remember that? because.
No, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
This is before my time.
Really? Order of St. Andrew, and it was an evangelism thrust of Wallace's.
Wow, that sounds like a very good thing.
Yeah,
I had never heard of it.
and the reason it was for Andrew and not the order of St. Peter, for instance, is
Because
because
Andrew brought
it
Peter.
invited, yes, the
And
personal.
Peter turned out to be a star, but Andrew brought Peter into the room.
That's right, and it was that personal invitation.
Yes.
That Wallace wanted to capture in the group.
Andrew's testimony was pretty simple. Could come and see. We have seen the Messiah. Andrew's testimony. So what are you going to tell us about this other list, Tim? Bartholomew.
There's something interesting here. Andrew was Simon Peter's brother. Like his brother, he was a fisherman. According to the Gospel of John, Andrew was the first disciple Jesus called. And while Peter gets all the credit for recognizing Jesus as the Messiah, remember, who do people say I am? Andrew not only brought Peter to Jesus, but he told him Jesus.
He gave him the answer. I had never thought about
Who
that.
gets all the credit?
I had never
Peter
thought
gets
of
the credit, but it was Andrew's.
Peter's a plagiarist. I had never thought of that. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Philip. Now, we just don't know very much about Philip.
There's only one kind of odd story about him, isn't it? The Ethiopian eunuch. We read that in the liturgy a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, we talked about that.
The book of Acts, chapter 8, I believe.
Yeah, Philip had to explain to the eunuch.
The book of Isaiah or something, or Jeremiah, Isaiah.
It was Isaiah.
Philip's most notable moment in the Gospels is his role in bringing Nathanael to Jesus. Nathanael is only mentioned in the Gospel of John.
This might be Nathaniel's part.
Yeah, this might be Bartholomew. Yeah,
Right,
we don't really know.
right. It's assumed that
Well, you can work by elimination. That it's,
Yeah.
same thing.
people have spent years looking at this, and I'm just taking their.
I know. I do too. I don't really.
conclusions. So we see him, if John appears to consider him one of the 12 in the Gospel of John. Bartholomew is never mentioned in John by name, so it must be Nathanael. Philip and Bartholomew are almost always listed together, and they're closely associated in church tradition. Jesus tests Philip by asking him whether they should buy the bread. Remember that in the beginning of the
Oh, yeah.
Gospel?
I've forgotten that.
And I believe Philip flunks that test.
Isn't that where he says, we don't have enough,
Right.
we don't have enough to even, buy.
Yeah. Yeah. Philip asked Jesus to show them God the Father, and Jesus responded by saying, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father.
Okay.
Bartholomew. He's one of the most obscure apostles. His name only appears in the 4 lists of Jesus. That's so we'll skip.
Matthew, of course, is
Matthew.
Levi.
Yeah. He's known as Levi.
And so therefore probably the writer of the book of Matthew.
It's generally assumed that he wrote the book of Matthew.
Right.
Jesus brought him into the inner circle of what would eventually become the world's largest religion. Despite the fact that Matthew is one of the better known disciples, he actually is only mentioned 7 times in the entire Bible, including the list.
Thomas, of course, is known for doubting.
Interesting thing about Thomas is that he was never actually named in Scripture.
Except for the list.
We don't know that Thomas is his name. Thomas comes from the twin. He was referred to as the twin. And in Greek, twin, te amos, or something like that.
Okay, so
Sounds
you're,
like Thomas.
It
So
might not be his name, it might be.
It might not.
the twin.
so you're saying there's a Greek word in this list
Yeah, almost.
that could be referring to another person.
yes. Let me read this. Thomas wasn't actually given a name in the original manuscripts. Thomas comes from the Aramaic word te amo.
Oh, I heard
Te
that.
amo.
Te amo.
But
Which means
just to be clear, I don't know if they even use commas, but in the original scripture, is a list, does a list appear with some indication? So for example, the reason I'm asking is, could Matthew be the Tiara?
No, I
Why?
don't think so. Because
You
Matthew was his given name, but the Levi comes from the tribe.
Israel.
It's-
but the Tiamo is a twin, right?
Yeah. So I don't twin at home, not another disciple like the other guys are.
Okay, well, let's move on. We're running out of time, so let's.
Well, Thomas, this is an interesting point. Thomas serves as a foil for Christians today, those who have not seen and yet believe.
Sure.
You remember when Thomas insisted on seeing the wounds,
And feeling the wounds.
putting his finger in the wounds.
Mhm.
Blessed are you who have believed because of that, but even more blessed are all those people who have not seen and yet have believed. That's really a key faith. James, the son of Alphaeus, he's only mentioned in the 4 lists of apostles too.
So we don't know a lot about him other than that.
Well, he's obviously not the same person as James, the son of Zebedee.
Right.
There were 2 other Jameses, James the Less and James, the brother of Jesus. The early church, most notably Jerome, assumed both of these Jameses were the same people as James, the son of Alphaeus. The strongest link is arguably between James. It goes on.
Did I just hear you say the church believes that James, the son of Alphaeus, is James, the son of the brother of Jesus?
We know from the gospel that Jesus had at least 4 brothers, James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas.
Okay.
And we know that the James the Less has at least 1 brother named Joseph. Some argue that Mark's attempt to distinguish James the Less suggests there was only 1 other James to distinguish him.
Okay, I've lost the point, but maybe it doesn't matter. James is, James the son of Alphaeus. James the son of Alphaeus is listed as a disciple.
Yeah.
And I have never thought that that was James, the brother of Jesus.
No,
In fact, yeah, that's right. So he is not the brother of Jesus.
that's correct. You remember the brothers and sisters of Jesus were calling him crazy.
Yeah, I was going to go there. So let's agree.
Yeah.
Who's Thaddeus?
Thaddeus was somebody else.
I think he's another one that's only on the list.
Yes.
Yeah, he doesn't appear anywhere else other than the list.
There is an interesting one. Simon the Zealot
Yes.
is probably a member of this Zealot party. Is probably a political zealot.
He was after the overthrow of the Roman occupation.
Probably that's true. And isn't it interesting that he would put Matthew, who worked for the Romans, together with somebody who was out to kill the Romans?
Yeah.
How did they get along?
So we've got, just to summarize, Tim,
Well, we're not,
you don't want to do Judas again. We're done.
There's two of them, right?
There are two Judases.
The one that was betrayed Christ.
yes, who was always referred to as Judas Iscariot. Then the other one, sometimes they're referred to as Judas, not Iscariot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My point is, he chose at least 4 fishermen. He chose a tax collector. He chose a zealot, a political revolutionary. So now I'm up to 6. So half of them have no good pedigree for running a new church.
Right.
And we don't really know the other 6, but assuming that he's got his about the same percentages running, it's unlikely that the other 6 were all ordained rabbis. So it's an odd group of people he's pulled together. So what can we say about his disciples?
Well, the Spirit helped them out a lot.
Okay, and I think that's an important point. We know the end of the story. The church does get established. So we can joke about these 12, but it turns out they all did their jobs. Except for Judas, who ends up being replaced by Matthias. But they did what he needed them to do. So he's going to put them through training. They're going to do some preaching and healing, and they'll fail at most of whatever they try to do. But in the end, they are victorious. The church that they establish overturns the Roman Empire 300 years later. So it's actually kind of an amazing story. Jesus chooses 12 unexceptional people.
Yeah.
And does amazing things, or great things, as we did with the music today. I think that's an important lesson. If you go back to the Old Testament, God often, I'll go beyond often, God mostly chooses people who are not well prepared.
Right. Well, notice.
Deficient.
Deficient. He chooses deficient disciples. We're the deficient club. See, we get
Gives us hope.
it gives us hope. Oh boy. Okay, I'm going to change the share to move to the Lord's Prayer, just because that's what I do. We've got the Lord's Prayer in front of us, so let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So,
I have to run. I have a softball game.
okay, go to your softball game. Any other?
Weather's.
Yeah. Any other comments for the good of the cause?
These fishers of men, over billions served.
Good point, Bill. Good point. Okay. Well, see you next week. We'll just continue right on into the second half of the chapter 3. So see you all. I'm going to end the meeting, Bill.
Be safe, be blessed, and look forward to our Pentecost celebration next
That's
Sunday.
right. Next week is Pentecost. Have a good week. Bye now.